welcome to episode 7 of Culture Talks. We are Heather and Shaila, the regional managers of Crown's Global Skills team. I'm Heather, I'm based in the UK, and I oversee the EMEA and the Americas regions.
Hello, I'm Shaila. I'm based in Hong Kong, and I oversee programs in Asia Pacific.
Each episode of Culture Talks, we want to pull back the curtain of cultural training, bust some myths, and do this with our own stories and examples on different topics each episode. We want to showcase the impact and the scope of how culture talks in different ways.
Last episode, we looked at returning home successfully and the impact of reverse culture shock. This episode, we're looking at customer service and why it's so difficult to get it right when you're navigating different cultures. And we know it's difficult because it's often the first area that we notice cultural differences. It's definitely the one where we could immediately recall examples of culture talking loudly.
Immediately. So yes, that time I tried to get into a shop somewhere called Big and Beautiful in Taiwan, and I entered and the shop assistant took one look at me and bellowed, "No, not you, too big."
Or that mortifying time when a waiter told me off for saying thank you too many times.
Horrific. And this isn't just something that makes a good story, although obviously once you've processed the trauma, it often can be. It's an ever growing, huge area for business as well.
Absolutely. Trying to get the customer service right is such an important area for a company. And as you said, why there's an ever increasing business focus on customer experience and value-led growth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's everywhere. But culture and customer service, doesn't always yell at you like our examples. It's not always as jarring or as noticeable as, the ones that we're still in recovery from. Sometimes culture whispers and you've got to look for it. So what might be written off as bad customer service might simply be that it's different customer service. You remember we've mentioned several times in our previous episodes that there is no right or wrong in culture. There's only different.
Yeah, right. And so this is what we're looking at today. We'll be looking at examples of when culture talks loudly, when it whispers, and why we might notice a slight cultural difference, how we can use these examples to examine the culture and what might be really going on beneath the surface, and highlight quite why it was it can be challenging for companies.
Yeah, I think we might be making the point quite loudly that customer service is hard, but why? So let's have a little think. So customer service interactions aim to emulate something that's part of the universal human contract. And that is the desire to connect with other people by showing that we are acceptable or desirable in order to fit in with that community. It's why we don't want to offend, or we don't want to make mistakes. We want to be accepted. And when we are connected and when we're accepted, we're not just doing it for fun. We're looking at getting what we need out of that connection with other people.
Right. So millions of years ago, getting what you needed might have been being part of a tribe for safety. And now it might be about retaining your customers by making sure they're happy. Both is aiming for connection and acceptance to a certain end.
Absolutely. And this is politeness theory. Big shout out to my fellow students of pragmatics or linguistics who recognize this as part of Brown and Levinson's politeness theory. Oh yeah, we've gone deep on this one. But it's what companies and it's what anyone working with customer service is trying to mirror. They want their service to be acceptable and desirable, and it has to fit how to be acceptable within different cultures. And what makes it more challenging for a company is that it's not just about training your staff to communicate in a way that is, culturally specific or sensitive. You've also got your staff to notice their own cultural norms, but also to understand that the impact of culture has on the customer experience or even the reporting of that experience.
So here's a really fascinating example of how culture can whisper within customer service. Feedback, right? So feedback is something that companies love.
Yeah.
We know it feels tangible, it can be made numerical, and it can be compared.
Yeah.
But can it when you factor in culture? So let's take air travel, for example, right? There was actually some research done by the Airports Council International that customers traveling would give very different satisfaction scores depending on where they came from. And in fact, 35% to 45% of the overall customer satisfaction is impacted by a person's cultural background.
Yeah. And that's massive, isn't it? For companies who are really wanting to make things comparable, then that, 35 to 45% is a massive part of it. And so a person from the UK who might have been on the same flight as someone from the US, had the exactly same experience, might report being more satisfied because they expect a lower quality of service. That's a cultural norm within the UK. But someone from the US might rate the same experience lower because they have higher expectations of customer service within their culture. But also on the flip side, if the stewards are really attentive and the pilot is incredibly informative, that same UK customer might feel overwhelmed and actually unhappy about all of that attention, where the American might have loved it. So, how does a company win there? How to know whether the customer service was good and how to make it better when you're navigating across different cultures.
Right. And what can also be based on culture is how much do you want to give that feedback? I always wonder about the culture whispers within that, that one that I'm sure many people consider. Are there different approaches needed for different cultures, knowing that what we know about the impacts that culture can have on that response?
Yeah, absolutely. For global companies or companies that are trying to navigate on a global level, it's really challenging. It's a big question. And we probably should have pointed out earlier that we're not actually going to be solving any of these questions here. That is not the aim of our podcast. We are just drawing attention to the fact that they exist.
We do sound very intelligent, though.
We do, don't we? And I think that showcasing, why we're seeing a real big uptick in interest in cultural training for non-relocating employees. There are so many variables of culture at play in so many different situations, and companies are trying to navigate that with some cultural training for their staff.
And this is why we're always talking about cultural training needing to be built on self-awareness. You've got to view it all through that lens.
Yeah, totally. So, if we put on our kind of cultural lens, put on our cultural glasses, think about that story about the waiter who told you off for thinking about him. What would that tell you if you were looking through your cultural lens?
Well, I could first understand that he was uncomfortable by the thank yous. I know, and that was probably my British cultural norms challenging his. I could also guess he wasn't used to that many thank yous. I probably overdid it a little bit. I could even.
It's just not possible as a Brit. I don't understand how that's possible.
It's just natural, right? I could even look at the context where we're in. In Hong Kong, the restaurant culture is built on time is money, norm is speed, it's functional, it's efficient. You don't dwell for hours in a restaurant. It's transactional. You're in and out, right? Yeah. And a waiter in Hong Kong is, it's often a job that's temporary. So if he was just looking on the job, as a means to an end, what he was doing wasn't really exceptional. He hadn't cooked me any, something special. Maybe I wasn't being a good customer by doing something different to accept his service. And he could have been just a bit annoyed or thought I was laughing at him or maybe not even being genuine, right?
How many times did you thank him?
I know.
But there's so much culture at play there, isn't there? Context is so huge. And how to be a good customer, that's a really interesting thing. That's so governed by culture. In the US, the customer is king. And, really, you could do a lot, couldn't you, to be a bad customer in the US, because the aim there is for people working in customer service, in restaurants at least, to get good tips, versus in France, where it's very, very different. Customers have to be good customers because the waiters in that culture are experts. They're professionals who expect to be respected in their profession. And I think that's really interesting because France has such a strong culture of egalitarianism. There's no hierarchy of, the customer knows best. And so they're higher up the hierarchy chain than the waiter. Nope. In France, the waiter is the expert and the customer needs to show respect by being a good customer.
Well, then, okay, let's look at your story about the big and beautiful shop. Let's examine that. What do you think that is with your cultural lens?
Oh my goodness. Firstly, I should remind myself that that incident was very unusual. That was not my normal experience of customer service in
Yeah.
shops
Mhm.
in Taipei. And I guess kind of like Hong Kong, there's a swiftness of service in Taiwan, and it's very fast paced, but also face is important. So maybe if I think about it from a face perspective, if I was looking at it through that perspective of customer service, maybe she was trying to meet my needs by trying to help me save face, to help me save my time, because she thought I wouldn't find anything to fit my like gargantuan 5'9", 175 centimeter frame. Possibly that was it. She was trying to save me time.
I think you got a good point there. She wanted to save face. Maybe you don't speak very good Chinese, and she would feel that she would lose face if her English wasn't good enough too, right?
Yeah. Do you know what? That makes me feel better. Sometimes looking at things from a cultural lens can definitely take the sting away when it's not met your own kind of cultural needs. So thanks for that, Shaila. And that actually brings us to the end of the episode today. We have talked about customer service, how it can shout loudly, how it can whisper, and how at each turn it can show us so much about cultural norms. It's a real opportunity to examine it for all people involved in the interaction. Customer experience, connecting and being desirable to customers is a huge, as we've said several times, it's really kind of growing in focus for businesses. And when you throw culture into the mix, it can get even more nuanced and complex. So I hope that we've shown that through each interaction, it can be a real opportunity to study and understand culture. And so that's what we'd like to leave you with. So as ever, our final call for you is to ask you a question, our lovely audience. Think about, Shaila and I have shared some scarring stories. Think about that story that you always, tell about a waiter on holiday, or that story that your grandmother always, trots out at parties about some customer service that kind of stands out. When you analyze that, what is that story? What is that example telling you about culture, about your culture, and about the other person's? So Shaila, it is always a joy. Thank you so much for listening to us. Join us next time for episode 8 of Culture Talks.